long before great longboats sailed ore to the billowing heart of America's industrial might along the Great Lakes, or rails carried Pennsylvania coal into the Steel City sat alongside the mighty Monongahela, men, barges, and mules moved stinking muck-covered rocks to any number of forges along unnamed streams. Colliers worked tirelessly turning abundant pitch pine into charcoal to run these forges. Mule teams carried the fruits of their labor, ingots, nails, tools, and cannonballs, across wooden roads to be used to build America. Today these forges are forgotten, their contributions overshadowed by better materials to be found deep in the boundless continent. But the rise and fall of America's first iron industry ironically foreshadowed the rise and fall of America's latest iron industry. The first Rust Belt is hidden in the endless pines and bogs of South Jersey. The earliest indication of ironworking in the New World comes from the Viking settlement of Meadow Cove, Newfoundland, where evidence of at least one smelt took place for nails. Later, the first post-Columbian iron mines would utilize the same Newfoundland bog iron in the 1570s, with Anthony Parkhurst sending ore samples back from England in 1578. Bog iron was mined in both Massachusetts and Virginia. The Falling Creek Ironworks in Virginia ceased in 1722 due to the devastating Jamestown Massacre. The Saugus Ironworks in Massachusetts was plagued by lawsuits, mismanagement, and ore supply issues, and had fallen to ruin by 1670. New Jersey, on the other hand, had many exceptional qualities and opportunities, which made bog iron a worthwhile profession, attracting many of the Saugus Ironworks' former employees with the promise to come and run their own little operation. Very tempting for the many young Yankee entrepreneurs that found themselves out of a job in New England. Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk a little bit about how the iron got into the bogs in the first place. In the Pine Barrens, the groundwater is low in pH and dissolved oxygen, but high in tannins and dissolved iron. That's why streams in the Pine Barrens have a tea or whiskey-like color. While moving quickly in creeks, the iron-rich water has little time to be exposed to oxygen. But if that creek were to run into a bog, then as the surface area increases, the water speed decreases. This, plus the consistent water temperature, provides the perfect opportunity for bacteria of the Acidotheobacillus genus to move in. Acidotheobacillus ferrooxidans are gamma proteobacterium that use the energy of iron and sulfur oxidation to perform its life functions. A byproduct of this is the bacteria leaves behind oxides. In our case, the bacteria use specifically iron, so they leave insoluble iron oxides that build up into deposits of bog iron over time. In the Pine Barrens, this occurs naturally, but as recently as the 1950s, the properties of this and similar bacteria have been used in industrial applications to biomine mine runoff to obtain additional ore that would otherwise be too costly to extract. The quality of the bog ore is a big question here, with the precipitated iron oxides being in an open swamp. The ore is prone to being mixed with sediments, organic compounds like leaves, roots, and other organic remains, which carry with them impurities. The presence of phosphorus and sulfur are typically also high, which can be a bad thing if the levels in the finished product are too high, leaving the casting brittle, in addition to later processing problems down the line. Now that we know how the ore is made, let's move on to the next step, getting it out of the bog. Bog iron mining requires little to no additional equipment besides what you were born with. In some instances, you may want a boat or a stick with a hook to sort of poke around and pry up ore, but mostly you wouldn't need anything like shovels or picks unless you found a huge piece of ore, that is. Once you get that ore out of the bog, you gotta move it to the forge. The most common way was by mule, barge, or some combination of both, depending entirely on which way was easiest and what you had available. Let's talk briefly about where you're bringing your ore, either a forge or a furnace. Forges and furnaces are terms in the Pine Barrens that are often used interchangeably and at random, but were always one of two things: a blast furnace or a bloomery forge. Blast furnaces were large structures where all you had to do was toss your ingredients in the top, in this case bog iron, charcoal from local trees, as well as lime made from burnt seashells, and out of the bottom comes mostly pure molten iron. The molten iron was immediately cast into pigs, where once cooled they would be sent off to wherever to be made into whatever. These were called pigs because the central channel and branching ingots looked kind of like a mother pig suckling her pork chops, though sometimes the iron would be directly cast into things, primarily cannonballs. Over time, the furnace would become full of slag and need to be cleaned out. This slag was used as gravel, turning trails around the furnace into slag-gravel roads. Bloomery forges are actually two things in one: a small bloomery furnace and a forge. The small furnace would be used to smelt off a good portion of the impurities, leaving behind an iron slag mix called sponge iron. This sponge iron would be further worked by the forge portion of the operation into wrought iron. Wrought iron was used for making all sorts of things: tools, nails, hoops for barrels, and wagon wheels, but most famously decorative railings and fences, which feature prominently in older buildings around New Jersey. The oldest forge using bog iron in New Jersey was James Grover's Ironworks at New Shrewsbury. Established soon after Grover purchased the tract in 1664, the enterprise was a success and allowed for the further development of the area. Grover mortgaged half his share of the ironworks and sold the other half to Colonel Lewis Morris, who leveraged his political connections to further the success of the ironworks. The ironworks was among the first in the colonies to use American-made machinery and facilitated the growth of Morris's Tinted Manor, named for the industrial centre of Tintern in Monmouthshire, Wales, where his family originates. In 1950, the borough voted to change its name to Tinton Falls in honor of Morris and to avoid further confusion with Shrewsbury Township, only separated by the parkway. While it's impossible to say exactly how many ironworks were in operation throughout the history of the Pine Barrens, such are the natures of business and the pines themselves, but a few names and local memories of the first iron industry remain. Ben Russett wrote in a post for njpinebarrens.com, in which he cross-references Charles Boyer's work, Early Forges and Furnaces of New Jersey, with Vivian Zinkin's work, Place Names of Ocean County, and compiled 36 ironworks in operation across what is today 5 counties. In 1789, David Wright and Caleb Ivins set up an operation on the Horicon branch near Lakehurst. The two built a forge as well as a sawmill, selling in 1793 to John Godfrey, who established a furnace on the property and called the works Federal Furnace. Sometime before 1822, the furnace was acquired by Samuel J. Reed and renamed Dover Furnace, who operated the furnace until his death, after which Benjamin Howell bought the property. Howell expanded the ironworks by adding a second furnace stack. Howell also owned the nearby Phoenix Forge, with both feeding iron to the Howell Works at El Air, all of which went out of business in 1850 due to competition from Pennsylvania. General John Lacey, in partnership with his son Thomas R. Lacey, developed Farrago Forge in 1809 on the middle branch of the Cedar Creek, located 8 miles northwest of Forked River. General Lacey constructed the dam that originally held Bamber Lake, then known simply as the Forge Pond, which was damaged in 1970 and replaced later that decade with the current dam. The forge itself was about 200 yards north of the dam, and the settlement of Farrago Village sprang up around the ironworks. General Lacey also built the road that bears his name from the forge to Forked River in 1810 to move the iron products from Farrago and the nearby Dover Forge, owned by Lacey's son-in-law, William Smith, in what is now Berkeley Township. The old Bergen Ironworks, then called the Washington Furnace, was originally built about 1814 by Jesse Richards on the site of the Three Partners sawmill. Unfortunately, the ore found in the vicinity made a very brittle iron that gave Washington Furnace a poor reputation, with the work soon being abandoned and falling into ruins. The operation was subsequently rebuilt in 1833 by Joseph W. Brick and renamed Bergen Ironworks, Bergen County being celebrated for its good iron. The ironworks attracted settlers who founded Bricksburg in honor of Joseph Brick, and in 1880 the settlement was redeveloped into the resort town of Lakewood, at the former site of the Bergen Ironworks at the eastern end of Lake Carasalgo, which is named for Brick's daughters, Caroline, Sarah, and Josephine, using their nicknames Carrie, Sally, and Joe. In 1766, a brilliant, often erratic, and enormously ambitious Quaker merchant of Philadelphia attempted to become New Jersey's Iron Baron. Starting at the age of 51, Charles Reed constructed the forges of Etna, Taunton, Atzian, and Batstow in quick succession, all of which were in operation by 1768. Unfortunately, Reed's erratic ambitions outpaced his financial abilities. Shortly after opening, Batstow Furnace was sold, and 449 shares of Atzian were also sold at the same year. 1770 saw Etna, Atzian, and Taunton all put up for sale. The operations did not change hands until 1773, except for Taunton, which Reed was never able to sell. Charles fell ill after the combined stress of his failure and the deaths of his wife and granddaughter, compounding his financial troubles and causing some sort of mental breakdown. 1773 saw Charles Reed skip town in a desperate bid to repay his debts, first attempting to liquidate his late wife's assets in Antigua. Charles was not able to do this quickly enough, having to skip town again to St. Croix. From the Virgin Islands, he wrote a letter to his friend Israel Pemberton, detailing his thought process as a desperate man not long for this world, doing desperate things to settle his debts. Charles Reed left St. Croix to the hamlet of Martinsburg, present-day Greenville, on the Tar River in North Carolina, opening a modest store and living a lonely life until the end of his self-imposed exile on December the 27th, 1774. Charles left not will nor grave, and no word of his death reached his family until the fall of 1775. When his son Jacob went to collect his few things, the lack of a will caused him trouble and litigation in the hamlet. Though Charles Reed's ambitions in life were too large for one man, his efforts were greatly validated just a few short years after his death, when his ironworks played a vital role in securing American independence during the Revolution, and its continuing freedom, with the first American naval fleet carrying Pine Barrens bog iron cannonballs during the First Barbary War. It's worth noting that technically all the iron operations in North America after 1749 not exclusively exporting iron back to Great Britain for manufacture were in violation of the Importations Etc. Act of 1749. The Act to encourage the importation of pig and bar iron from His Majesty's colonies in America, and to prevent the erection of any mill or other engine for slitting, rolling of iron, or planting any forge to work with a tilt hammer, or any furnace for making steel in any of said colonies, or simply abbreviated to the Iron Act, sought to stifle the natural development of an American iron industry, which the British iron industry feared would supersede it without interference. The act was amended by the Customs Etc. Act of 1765. The Iron Act in its aspects amended in 1765, as far as I can tell, was not enforced and wholesale ignored by all parties, even in Canada. The act was repealed by both the Statute Law Revision Act in 1867 and Canadian Confederation. What eventually killed the bog iron industry was ore quality. The most economically important ores had to be low in both sulfur and phosphorus, and a base flux like lime couldn't have been used in the processing of the ore to remove these impurities. If lime purified pig iron were used to make steel via the Bessemer process, the only way to make lots of steel at the time, the flux would coat the inside of the converter and eat away at the ganister plates lining the vessel. It wouldn't be until 1878 that basic lined converters would be invented, and by that time America had access to very pure ore from further west. The main concern, though, is the amount of iron in the ore. The highest recorded concentration that I can find is a sample with 59.89% iron, but the same source indicates that the average is 30% iron content for New Jersey bog ore, but realistically this number was wildly variable towards the lower end. To contrast, the ore currently being exported by Australia, the world's largest exporter of iron, is hematite containing almost 70% iron by weight. In the mid-19th century, iron production started moving west out of the coastal areas of America and into western New York, Pennsylvania, and later after the Civil War, further west into Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois. Advancements in technology combined with greater abundance and quality of the ingredients available out west made it impossible for eastern iron producers to compete. Dirty bog ore was replaced with ancient pre-Cambrian banded iron sedimentary formations, some of which were in the range of 3,700,000,000 years old. Charcoal, still in industrial use until the Second World War for some applications, was phased out first by coked bituminous coal and later energy-dense and relatively clean-burning anthracite coal, in combination with more precise open hearth techniques. Though Middle America became the beating heart of American industry, the early 20th century saw America produce 1/3 of world iron, peaking between 1937 and 1953. Fully hitting the apex of 53% of the world production in 1945. After the Second World War, American steelmaking began to fall until the mid-1960s, when America became a net steel importer. After half a century of mergers, bankruptcies, and foreign competition, the United States, as of 2022, produces only 80 million tons of steel, making it fourth behind Japan's 89 million tons, India's 125 million tons, and China's 1 billion tons. The three largest current steel producers remaining in the United States are Charlotte, North Carolina-based Nucor Corporation, producing recycled steel, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania's United States Steel Corporation, and Cleveland, Ohio-based Cleveland Cliffs, respectively. In 2018, Donald Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel imports, exempting South Korea and Australia. In 2022, the Biden administration reaffirmed the tariff in the face of lawsuits brought via the World Trade Organization from China, Norway, Switzerland, and Turkey as part of a wider policy of reintroducing key strategic industries to America. On December 18, 2023, the Nippon Steel Corporation, Japan's largest steel producer, announced its intentions to purchase U.S. steel, to the tune of nearly $15 billion, and to the consternation of the Biden administration and the United Steel Workers Union. Nippon Steel reconfirmed its commitment to the purchase earlier in 2024, but Pennsylvania's position as a battleground state in among the most contentious presidential elections in America's history has seen the purchase come under fire from state and federal figures on both sides, with Republican nominee Donald Trump promising to block Nippon Steel. Things remain tense in the American steel industry. I think it's fair to say that the whole enterprise is an endangered species, and these United States would be worse off if the great works of the interior fall. Thank you for watching or listening. If you have a topic you'd like me to explore, feel free to leave a comment. Liking the video would be a big help, and subscribing to Mid-Atlantic Chronicles even more. Thank you again.